Welcome back to the Zero E Michigan podcast. Our guest today is Paul Pancella. Paul is the Southwest Michigan Electric Vehicle Association president and the Kalamazoo Electric Vehicle Association president and a professor of physics at Western Michigan University. So, Paul, if you want to introduce yourself.
Oh, sure, Carl. Thanks for inviting me. I've been a professor of physics for a long time here in Kalamazoo. Had a pretty normal career as such, but also been interested in electric vehicles for a long time. I was fairly early, I guess, on the latest bandwagon. I converted an old internal combustion engine car that I owned in 2008 and had fun and learned a lot doing that and getting close to the end of a long and satisfying career at Western Michigan University.
And I got the
Good.
ride. I'm Larry in Paul's car. I don't remember what year that was. We did a parade with it too.
Oh yeah, well that had to be like 2009. That was early.
And then shortly thereafter, right, 2012, the Chevy Volt came out, and one of the members, and Paul and I were on his board at Green Earth, Michigan. So that's how I met Paul, was through this young man that started this Green Earth, Michigan, which was helping Kalamazoo to get chargers. Anyways, and then Paul was interviewed by Carl when Carl was doing radio interviews, and that's how I met Carl.
You did those out of WKTV.
Yeah, there was
WKTV one.
the
Yeah,
podcast, the yeah,
It's
which
probably
yeah.
that one.
yeah, we lost the studio engineer for that. So unfortunately we had to quit that. What I wanted to talk about today is we hear a lot about the materials required for EVs. When you compare internal combustion engine vehicles and how efficient they are. One of the things that often comes up, and sometimes in a negative way, is yeah, but you need all these materials and it takes energy and it takes mining. So really, are these vehicles really better for the environment? Posed as a question, but of course makes it sound very negative. And but there is some truth to it. We need materials to do anything, and the key is at scale. If you build one or two things, it's not a big deal, but there are lots of billions of people on the planet, and if we want to start making more electrification, more electric vehicles, then we need buildings, roads, vehicles, and pretty much anything, batteries at scale, which means we need a lot of materials. I recently listened to a podcast from the series The Great Simplification with Nate Hagens, and he had what he called a reality roundtable on EVs, and had some pretty high-powered guests on there talking about EVs. Our plans for dramatically increasing the production of electric vehicles as a replacement for internal combustion engines materially, economically, or even infrastructurally possible. And that's what I want to try to unpack here today. And I know none of us here are experts in geometallurgy, oil and petroleum reserves. However, Paul, being a physics professor, is an expert on efficiency, I would say. So I wanted to talk about that. When we talk about EV market penetration, and all of us here are in that space where we want people to drive electric. We organize EV shows, but what do we think the world is going to look like when more and more people drive EVs? So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, that's a big question. There's a lot to unpack there, Carl. I had the opportunity to check out most of that roundtable as well and some of the other notes and literature that's out there. There are some ambitious plans and projections that are almost certainly aspirational, that are not going to happen. One of the particular benchmarks that was discussed in that series was 30% of cars in Europe to be electric by 2030. And they made a very good case that that is not going to happen. That's a stated goal of some governmental commission, but it's almost certainly not achievable for Europe. And they were very convincing about that. There are there are obstacles, there are bottlenecks in manufacturing, sourcing materials, uh, changing infrastructure, the electric grid, that make that probably very unrealistic for the European market as a whole. Uh, one of the questions that comes to mind then is, what is the purpose of having these goals? Is it just political? Is it fantasy? Is it
Well, maybe
there's
as
a
a
lot
vision,
there
right? You got to
as a
put
vision,
something out there. You got to have something aspirational. You may not
right?
hit the target. I mean, that's how I see it.
Right. The charitable interpretation is that our real goal have is to burn less fossil fuel, and that we have to have challenges. We have to have something in front of people that looks important, and that's, if you go too far in that direction, then you get the backlash. So it's tricky, and I'm glad you stressed that my expertise is not in geometallurgy, but it's also not in politics, and it's not really in economics. I mean, so much of this is questions of economics that is very difficult to understand for me.
Yeah, but I think one of the things about the economics piece is that the sort of neoclassical economics all assumes that growth is a good thing, right? So
That's
we always
correct.
have to grow. So we always hear in the newspaper, oh, well, we have to have growth. And, recently in Michigan, for example, we see that, oh, the population growth is declining and this is a crisis. They even talked about this at the Mackinac Policy Conference. And I thought to myself, why is slowing down? Why is this a crisis? And I get it, in terms of like Social Security, it's actually, a Ponzi scheme of sorts that you have to have the younger people to be able to pay in so that we older people can, continue to do what we're doing. But I'm not sure if we talk about economics, we need to be very careful about, that we actually embrace the current thought process on economics.
Yeah. No, limitless growth. You're absolutely right. Is the doctrine, and as a physicist and these engineering types, many of us realize that that's a fallacy. There can't be limitless growth, and it's just not clear how you can compromise on that, how you can get a consensus on that, because so much of our normal way of doing business presumes growth, is based on growth, requires growth. Part of it is to make the lucky people like us who are successful feel better, and without having to give up anything. If we're gonna, so much of the population does gets by with less, and if we're gonna, and we feel for those people, if we want more economic justice, we would need to spread the wealth around. Growth lets us off the hook, in a sense. Growth lets us raise up the less fortunate without us having to give up anything.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's kind of the theory that the pie is getting bigger and therefore everyone's going to get a piece of the pie. But the trite phrase is you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet, and
Yeah,
that's what
and
this addresses. And if you look at any of these discussions about EVs, there's kind of this assumption that, well, at some point we're just going to turn over the entire fleet of what we're driving now, and they're all going to be electric. If you're along those lines, if that's that very optimistic sort of view. And I guess that's the part that I want to talk about. Does it make sense for people to keep driving these huge vehicles? And when I say huge, I remember, when I went to high school in the 1980s, a Honda Civic was a teeny little car. And, I drove a Volkswagen Beetle, which was a pretty tiny car. And these days, a Beetle and a Civic, just to pick on those, they're not that small anymore. And on top of that, we have people driving SUVs. That seems to be the trend, right? Nobody wants to drive sedans anymore for whatever reason. We all figured that bigger is better, is more utility. But is that possible? Is that sustainable? And I think that's the part that I struggle with.
it's not sustainable, clearly. Uh, I constantly bemoan the lack of interest in small vehicles, especially in this country. I mean, I haven't traveled to Europe very much, but in the past when I have, it was a stark difference. Even in most countries in Europe, at the same time, the cars were noticeably much smaller, and that was fine. The what you said is very true about many of the car makers in North America, responding to what they say, responding to the market. And I have no reason to doubt them that people want more larger cars. The Civic hatchback that I converted was still pretty small, a 1992 version, but they were growing even at that point. It was every year the Civic was heavier and heavier. It used to be at the bottom of the line. Then Honda replaced it at the bottom of the line with other cars, a Fit, for example. The Honda Fit was a nice small car. That was the kind of the heir to the Civic. It's been discontinued. Chevy Spark is gone. Ford Fiesta, long gone, just gone. There's no replacement. The Honda Insight is gone. Hyundai Accent is gone. The Beetle, gone. There is no Beetle anymore. There's no Golf from VW.
Or we can't get the ID3, which is the replacement in Europe.
It's not here, not in this country.
Because they said,
right.
Well, that's not in the North American market.
Yeah, so it's worse. It's even worse. It used to, for a while, the cars would get bigger, but they'd add a smaller car at the bottom of the line. Now it seems like they're not even doing that. And it's interesting that I think it does relate to materials, but also economics. I mean, what they always say, which naively makes sense, the car companies make more money on larger cars, partly because the people don't see the small car as desirable. Some people see it as less safe on our highways now, which they probably have a point. But the materials that go into a car, you would think if a car is bigger, it uses more materials, costs more to make. But I think the materials are actually a fairly small fraction of the cost of manufacturing, and that the complexity of modern cars, all the electronics and stuff, that if the car is 50% larger, it doesn't cost 50% more to make.
Right.
Because it's just as complex, the manufacturing, the labor that goes into it, and but the people still think it's worth 50% more, so they're happy to pay 50% more.
Or they don't
even
have a choice, right? Like you said, that's
the
cars that
issue.
are at the bottom of the entry level cars, they aren't there anymore.
Right. Is it chicken or egg? That's what I'd like to know. I don't know.
Well,
yeah. I heard someone selling that all right. Ford just quit making sedans. Kind of like what they're saying is because they can make more money off the SUVs
and trucks.
And then all the way up to the trucks. And by the way, I just drove out of Chicago today. I saw two Lightnings, one going down the I-80.
Ford F-150 electric pickup.
Surprise! Yeah, I don't know if it stood out in my head, but I just noticed, wow, two Lightnings out in the wild coming home from Chicago. I'm pretty sure I saw a couple Teslas. I used to notice them a lot more, but they're everywhere. But I know they just stuck out. So even though they didn't change them that much, I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, if you're in the EV space, look for that grill in the front. That's kind of solid instead of the mesh one for the
I
ICE
still
car.
did look at the rear quarter for the blue Lightning, just to make sure. Wow, that was a Lightning. So it was just surprising. But anyways, the big three are forcing, like I think you guys are right, they're forcing us. We don't have that option anymore. They, like Paul just pointed out, they quit making all the small ones. We got to buy SUVs or trucks.
So I had the chance to attend a Michigan Auto Dealers Association meeting, and they had a speaker from Bloomberg, and he essentially said what we're talking about here, that there's an escalation of vehicle sizes and complexity and cost, of course, because there is, a vehicle, whether it's a Honda Fit or it's a Hummer EV, it still has four wheels. And yes, the Hummer wheels are bigger and you have a little bit more materials, but it's incremental. But I think auto companies are making so much more profit on these bigger vehicles, and they just don't bring the smaller vehicles out there, so that you really don't have a choice. Right. And now the one thing I don't really understand from a market perspective, if I'm if I'm a different manufacturer and I still make a smaller vehicle and that's still desirable, why isn't that selling and why am I not making a profit? But maybe that profit margin is just too small to really make me that much money. So I'm going to follow the trend and just build bigger SUVs and bigger vehicles that make more money.
Well, the people aren't, they would say the people in the public aren't willing to pay as much as it would cost to make the same profit margin.
Yeah, right. That's the illusion. I really like how Paul put that, that your brain wants to tell you, oh, that truck, all that much more metal. That's 50%. So we feel like we're getting 50% and we're paying twice as much money. We're getting this vehicle's twice the size. But the reality is, right, it's the computers and all the little nuts and bolts that are expensive. That extra metal really isn't. But everybody's happily to pay that.
Well, and then how do you convince somebody that they don't need that? I don't know if you know who Micah Toll is. He's on Electrek. He's one of the reporters. He does a lot of reporting on two-wheeled vehicles. And so he's big on e-bikes and little scooters and things like that. And he put out an article last year sometime and said, you don't need a bigger SUV. You need one of these, like a rad, the rad power bikes with the extra rack on the back. And he was showing some videos and pictures of how he was carrying construction materials on this thing. And there was a huge outcry. It's like, you can't tell me what I need and what I don't need. I'm out on the farm and I need to do this. And I get it. There's absolutely use for that. There's a use case. And there are people that want to take their fifth wheel or their horse trailer up to the UP and they're going to need an F-250, F-350 with lots of towing capability and power and range and all that stuff. And the EV market doesn't have that. But I'm just making this up. 80-90% of trucks running around have one passenger and are carrying a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread. So, does that really make sense? And do we deserve the cheap energy that goes along with that to allow us to drive to the grocery store in these behemoths?
Yeah, those are good points. We have to keep in mind that some of us have the means to have multiple vehicles, even in small households. Some of us don't, and so versatility, even if you only need the truck 5 times a year, if you can only afford one vehicle, you can only get a loan for one vehicle, you're going to go with the more versatile vehicle. That's one of the ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
Another ingredient is feeling safe on the highway. If you have to take a lot of highway trips, you feel safer in a bigger vehicle. Personal safety is certainly a big consideration. But from my point of view, I've always yearned for using the right tool for the right job, and railed against the giant 2-ton car used to pick up groceries, no matter what it is. I mean, again, speaking for the people in the cities, ideally, you do choose to live near your services, you're near your job, and that you work for bikeable and walkable neighborhoods with the grocery stores there. And so it's all connected with the big box stores, shouldering out the smaller retailers, and working for walkable, bikeable cityscapes, roads, and all multi-user roads. Complete streets is one of the movements that I always favor for those reasons as well.
But what do we say to the people that want to live out in the country and want, a good chunk of land and maybe do some farming? They just want to be away from people. So now you're commuting 50 miles each way, 100 miles round trip, and maybe you need that truck and I don't know, you got a horse, so you got to haul hay or something like that. So, I mean, those are all obviously legitimate uses. But now let's say that the price of energy just doubles. Okay. Price of gas is now hits $7-8 a gallon. So, what do you say to people like that? Or, since we're talking about materials, the scarcity of materials always ends up translating into higher price. So let's say instead of $50,000 or $60,000, your average truck with maybe a couple of bells and whistles is going to be $100,000 to $120,000. So, I mean, where do we see this going? Because that's kind of what I see happening here is if we keep building more, we want to keep building more. And, we keep saying, well, the price of batteries is going to come down because of manufacturing efficiency and materials. Well, I think the materials is a real bottleneck. So where is all this going? I don't know. Where's your crystal ball on this?
It's really hard to predict the future. The farther ahead you go, uh, I I'm in favor of a gradual change, a gradual shift. Uh, I would not be particularly troubled if 20 years, 30 years from now, half the vehicles sold are still fossil fuel. They'll probably be more efficient than they are now. If vehicles last longer, that's generally a good thing. So I don't think we should be wholesale confiscating fossil fuel vehicles at any point in the future. Market penetration for the new vehicles is one thing, but the percentage of vehicles on the road, is going to always be much less than that. And until the suitable, affordable option is there, there will still be long haul trucks running on diesel, I think, for a good long time, and aircraft. I Along the way, I think we should try to use those things less. Work for more local sources so that we don't have to transport goods so far. And I'd be happy if people cut back on long airplane trips, but that's me.
Wherever possible, right sizing the transportation. I mean, I try to use my bike. I live in a walkable downtown. Today we didn't drive at all, for example. So I walked everywhere that I needed to go, and which is great. I understand some people don't want to do that, but I was already thinking tomorrow morning I need to go get a gallon of milk. Maybe I should go hop on my e-bike after the storm is through. Of course, this being Michigan, that's not going to work in the winter. Paul, you and I are both Aptera reservation holders. I have a picture behind me here. So for those that don't know what that is, it's a three-wheeled hyper efficient vehicle, 10 miles per kilowatt hour, which is about 3 times as efficient as a Tesla Model 3 with some solar panels on top to hopefully get 30 to 40 miles just from sunshine every day. So things like that, I think there's some possibilities for some neat solutions that can use less materials, use less fuel to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, I love that. I've always been a fan of efficiency for a long time. It's so much better in so many ways. But like you briefly mentioned earlier, it's not sexy. Conservation is not nearly as exciting or fun as consumption, I guess. And
Well, they
so it
did
is
make
it is
that
a
one
hard
look
sell.
good though, right? They did make that car look sexy though. I'm a fan of it.
Aerodynamics is always sexy to me.
Well, I guess I've had a problem with like the Leaf and the Prius look, but the
The,
Amtera, boy, I really think it has a nice look.
the new Prius
But
looks kind of cool.
but nobody's going to buy the Aptera, Carl. You and I
No,
know that.
I don't know about that. I think they're looking pretty good. I'm hopeful. I'm not willing to go on the accelerator program and put down 10,500 bucks to an investment. But
How many are they gonna sell in the first year?
in the first year, who knows? That they're going to get started slowly. I think. I think they're going to be lucky to make the what is it 2,000 for the launch edition.
Which is when
So
is that expected?
it's speculation. I'm going to say a year from now at best.
So what there's a problem. Why is that taking so long? And I don't
Money,
know if I'm
money. It
dreaming
takes
wrong, but didn't Elon get the Model S his very first launch? I thought it was quite quick. Was it?
No,
I think
that was delayed too.
that was delayed. And don't forget, that wasn't their first vehicle. Their first vehicle was the
Oh yeah.
Roadster that was built on a Lotus body to develop their electric drivetrain. And I mean, Tesla almost went under a couple of times, and that's the same issue that a lot of the startups are having. It's really, really hard to get through that valley of death between concept and manufacturing.
So how far along is Ampera now? Are they keeping
Aptera. Say it right, Larry. Aptera.
Aptera.
Aptera. Okay. You think amp though, right? Would be
I
kind of a
know,
nice.
but that's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So
they're in fundraising. They have
They have been for years.
well, yeah, but I mean they have prototypes. They actually have tooling that's been made now. So that's hopeful. They've bought the those autonomous robot things that are essentially the assembly line. So I mean I see some stuff happening. But it's really hard to start up a new company to build something like a vehicle.
what was the other company that made a three-wheel vehicle?
There have been
Archimoto.
at least half a dozen.
Yeah,
They,
Arcimoto, and then the owner or CEO got a DUI in it, and it totally grenaded.
well, that I
Like,
think that was just a symptom, but yeah, I think they're having similar. This is my interpretation. They're also having difficulty coming to scale. So I think they're still building like one off, two off. They're building the vehicles and getting them in customer hands, but they're not going out at scale. I mean, I had a pre-order on one of those too, $100. I'm pretty sure that's gone. I don't know if they're going to get there. So
and
again,
and
and I mean, look at some of the other start. Look at Rivian. We're getting way off topic here, but
right.
look at Rivian. Look at Lucid. I think they're all struggling financially because it's very difficult to build a cost-effective vehicle right off the bat.
I'm hearing lucid, yeah. And I mean we are off a point, but then on the other end, the big picture you're talking about, can we really make all these things? Well, are we going to even be able to? Because like Paul has pessimistic that like these three-wheel vehicles will ever take off. Is that what I'm getting from you, Paul?
Yeah,
You don't.
I'm pessimistic because economics rules and the market, the free market, doesn't do well on this kind of thing. It doesn't value efficiency. It doesn't value conservation. People
Well,
saving for the future has never been very popular in this country.
the market rewards efficiency from economy of scale. And of course, you can't start up and be a
Right.
Toyota or a Volkswagen
Right.
on day one. And that's really the issue. I mean, if you look at how Tesla did this, it was small volume, high cost, and then the slope went down, right? Even the Model S was
Right.
an expensive or
The-
is an expensive vehicle.
Historically, the only times when small cars have sold in this country have been times when fuel prices have spiked.
Right.
So the only hope, to encourage conservation, I think, realistically, is to make it directly hit the pocketbook of the average consumer. Then they become interested in the small economic vehicles. So we want, our only hope is high gasoline prices. Ironically, by doing what Carl and I and Larry are doing, encouraging the adoption of electric vehicles, we are decreasing the demand for, if we succeed, we're decreasing the demand for gasoline motor fuels and depressing the price.
Right.
I
So then
understand.
we have to come
understand.
back to cost parity of electric vehicles. And I mean, we know the total cost of ownership is already lower. However, the foot in the door price for the average person is often still a stumbling block.
Yeah, but
So,
if gasoline prices go down,
right,
then it's less of a difference.
right.
Yeah.
Understood. So what can we do better as consumers and EV drivers? I mean, what should we be doing differently?
Don't buy a Hummer.
Trophy
Yeah.
truck, right?
Protest the discontinuation of the Bolt, a great small EV.
Yeah. What do you is that part of that narrative where they're going to start making the Silverado and
And the
SUVs
Blazer.
and no little car? Yeah, and the Blazer.
So fun fact, I saw a Blazer at the Muskegon, a Blazer EV, I should say, at the Fruitport Meyer the other day with a GM employee driving it, and he told me not to take pictures.
Wow.
But he did tell me he was testing it. He was going up north, doing a real world test of charging and all that stuff, shakedown. And he said they're coming out soon. So I think what's happening is they don't want to destroy their own market by having the Bolt still around. They want to increase the demand for the new vehicles on the Ultium platform.
So
I
the
have seen
Blaze,
the Cadillac Lyric. I've seen trailers, the car trailers with 8, 9 of them on there. Looks good.
Yeah, it looks
Looks
great, but
really
who can
good.
afford it again? It's almost like the Model S. So that's what, Paul was saying, the Bolt EV was actually reasonably affordable for the average person. And that's what makes it appealing. And then we can actually go to scale again, but then of course they need more material. So maybe GM decided, hey, we need the batteries that we are able to buy on the market. We're going to put those into the Blazers and in the new vehicles because our profit margin is higher. So here we
right,
go again. We've come full cycle again.
right. The argument for efficiency is use smaller batteries, get twice as many vehicles for the same amount of lithium. So the other thing EV drivers can probably do is not insist on huge range if we want to conserve materials. Not be afraid to buy a car with a little bit less range. The charging infrastructure can help with that, but it's the same with regular cars. How much range do you really need?
Because why do you
Yeah,
have to carry around thousands of
yeah.
pounds of battery?
Modular batteries, yeah, would be cool.
Yeah, so we had run that through, but again, right? People don't want to be that practical, I guess.
All right, gentlemen, any final thoughts in terms of materials efficiency as it relates to EVs?
Paul and I went. Yeah, it was Paul. I don't think you came, Carl, to the plant in Holland, LG Chem.
Paul's wearing his shirt.
Okay, and so they're doing five. I can't remember whatever it is. Let's say it's 5 gigawatts a year. They're growing to 25 gigawatts. That's their next. They're if you go by, there's cranes everywhere. So they're gonna. Was that 4 times the size of the plant?
But where are they getting the materials? I mean, they have to buy them on the open market. And, right now, and again, we're going on that's a different tangent, but China kind of controls the processed lithium right now. So where are these
And
materials going to come from? Is there another, we've heard of sodium batteries. We've heard of solid state batteries that Toyota keeps talking about. So, but all these materials, all these things require materials that have to be somehow mined and sourced, and and then what happens to them at the end of life, which again is another discussion point. A lot of the and I'll put some links in the show notes. A lot of the articles that say, oh yes, we have enough materials, are going on the premise that at some point we're going to start to recycle and we have a cradle to cradle economy. But look at how little of plastics and metals we recycle now. It's already difficult. So how are we going to get these tiny little, I'm probably saying it, neodymium magnets and the tiny pieces of cobalt and nickel? How are we going to separate all those out at scale from when there's dozens of different manufacturers and they all use them slightly different? So I think this idea that we're just going to get materials from recycling wholesale is a little bit pie in the sky at the moment.
Yeah, I'm sure I believe you're right about that, Carl, that a lot of the analysis is too simplistic. That these are valid considerations. The only point that I want to raise every time that comes up is that materials for batteries and structures, they aren't consumed, and we will be reducing the recovery and refining of petroleum, which is consumed during the life of a vehicle. Okay, right. So that scale is one thing, but you have to compare it with what we're getting rid of also.
Right. I'm not saying we should stop the endeavor altogether, but I think we have to get better at it. I seem to recall that Volvo / Polestar was starting to do activities like marking the materials in their vehicles as to what quality of materials there are, so that when that vehicle is eventually is disassembled, whoever's disassembling it can say, oh, this is aluminum that has this purity, and now I shouldn't mix this with
Yeah.
soda bottles or soda cans. I need to keep that separate so that the amount of energy that's required to actually recycle it and make it usable again is so much smaller. So I think that from that aspect, we need to get much better at this.
Definitely.
Final thought, Robert Llewellyn. He just had a chemical engineer, and she went out and collected the data. There are several plants now that have taken, I believe, the batteries from the Bolt, all those batteries they were worried about, and they stacked them up in shipping containers, and now they are being used next to a solar farm, as those
Secondary,
batteries.
Stationary storage.
And
stationary
so
storage.
she was
Mhm.
very proud of the recycling that is being done, and seeing this, the car batteries will be just stacked right up. They won't even be shredded. They still have another life to go, because even at 70, 60, 50%, they're still valuable as storage.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the idea that the battery is just going to be thrown into a landfill is kind of ludicrous, because those materials are worth it, right? It's just we have to get better at this so that it becomes not cradle to grave, but cradle to cradle.
The car batteries are big enough that there's value.
I mean, we do tend to forget that those that are critical of EVs and the batteries, I mean, we're all using devices probably right now that use those same type of batteries, right? I got a laptop in front of me. I got a second laptop. I got a cell phone. All these things have lithium ion batteries, and
Those are
and
the ones
and
that aren't probably getting recycled
yeah,
properly.
and I think I have a collection of cell phones in a drawer somewhere. Not sure why, and they're not recycled. They're sitting in my house. Gentlemen, thank you for the discussion. I know we didn't solve the world's problems. I think maybe the one takeaway that I have is that I think energy and materials are going to get more expensive. I'd like to think that I prefer the vehicles that are more efficient rather than
Smaller is better.
Smaller is better, but I'm a culprit too. I mean, I have multiple EVs, so it's going to be an interesting time. So again, thanks for your time, and yeah, we'll do it again sometime.
Thanks, Carl. Larry.
Good to see you, Paul.
If you enjoyed or learned from this episode of Zero E Michigan, please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. Visit our YouTube channel for other related videos at youtube.com/@0E-Michigan.